Contact has had we've had a long relationship with Battersea Art Centre in that we have long admired each other's work. We never worked together before, but we have often seen each other's shows, talked to each other about the work we were doing with young people. Both of our organisations also have a long history of working with People's Palace projects. We at Contact have had a long relationship that goes before my time with Brazil and Brazilian artists. Started with Afro Reggae and did a lot of work with them, and they've come and engaged with lots of young people. Two other companies like Grupo 19 who are based in Sao Paulo who are actually making a summer show with our young company at the moment. And both BAC and Contact had been out, myself and David and Liz from Battersea Art Centre had been out to Brazil and met artists and producers there, and then Faustini was a delegate on the return trip, and he'd come to both Contact and Battersea Art Centre. And through that exchange that People's Palace Projects facilitated, we realised that there were things we had in common with the way Faustini thought about and talked about young people and the way that Contact and BAC did. So both organisations were invited by Gulbenkian to apply for their participatory theatre awards, and basically we picked up the phone to each other and were like, we've always wanted to work together. We've both, had these conversations with Faustini. Is this an opportunity to have a look at whether the agency or the agency model could be translated to the UK? Would it be something that would be worth exploring together? So we decided that we thought it was. We really didn't think Gulbenkian would go for it because it wasn't what they had funded previously. It was a participatory theatre award, and previously it had funded large-scale participatory theatre making projects. And obviously we weren't going to make any performances. We were going to support young people to create social enterprises, businesses that probably had nothing to do with the arts. So we really had no idea whether they would be up for it or not. And we got shortlisted and sort of went in with they're either going to think it's brilliant or they're going to wonder why on earth we've been picked to shortlist. So we presented to a panel of about 20 people with a young person from Contact as well, who I think absolutely sold the project to them really and talked about. She was a young woman who had lived in North Manchester, which is obviously where the agency is based, now lives in another part of Manchester, but talked really eloquently about the challenges of living in North Manchester and actually why her family had in the end moved out of that part of Manchester, and what arts and culture had done for her in terms of her experience. And they decided that they would go for it, which was fantastic, and that they would sort of basically take a risk because none of us knew whether it was going to work at all. We had absolutely no idea whether a project that was developed and run in the favelas was going to work at all in, North Manchester and Clapham Junction in London. So we went out there and saw the agency in action, talked at length with Faustini about the methodology, which he speaks brilliantly about. Had that translated through translators. Some of it made sense, some of it didn't make sense. Some of the bits we thought didn't make sense were actually being translated correctly. It's such a fantastic concept that sometimes you just think that can't possibly be true. They've got the translation wrong there, and you would interrogate it and realise they hadn't got the translation wrong. That was what he wanted you to do. And so it was through that really, and it was about taking the methodology and the essence and testing it here, but also thinking about how we adapt it to a UK context. And we were constantly asking ourselves, how much would it need to be adapted? How different are these young people? How different is the context? In some ways, obviously, it's vastly different, and then in other ways, it's very similar. So we decided quite early on that we would test it in the first instance purely as possible, that we could get it from our understanding through translators, just to see what worked. And we had some really serious doubts about some of the things that we were testing. Paying young people. We'd never paid young people before for participating in the project. That felt quite contentious for ages. It doesn't feel contentious at all now. I feel like it just is, but what really felt like a huge deal at the beginning. It seems to be a struggle for other people. Now we've got past that struggle. It seems that other people do have a problem with that. Gulbenkian never did. They never questioned that. And that is one of the largest expenses within the context of the project. But it does make a huge difference to the types of young people that you're accessing, and which is why Faustini was so adamant that we couldn't lose that bit of it. But it is complicated here because we have a benefit system that doesn't exist in Brazil, and once you start paying people for things, it starts interfering with lots of other things. So it is more complicated here than obviously it is there. But we have found ways to make it work, and I think it is a really important part of it. So we have stuck to our guns at keeping that in, even though it does, as I said, make it quite expensive. Other people wouldn't. What we've found in talking to other funders is the agency really seems to fall through the gaps. So arts funders don't get it. It's not an arts project in their mind because there isn't an artistic outcome. So even though we know very clearly that the process is an artistic one, it's a theatre making methodology process that we use to develop these ideas, because no one puts on a show at the end, or they don't become an artist necessarily. They don't think it's for them. They think it's a social programme. And then social funders, I think, struggle to understand why you would use arts or creative practices as the methodology to develop these ideas. Why wouldn't you use more traditional methods that would be used by Princess Trust or other people that are more used to developing business ideas or startups or incubators or whatever? It's to get funders to really to meet the young people where possible makes a huge difference, so they can really understand the type of young person we're talking about, that they can hear direct from that young person what difference this project has made to them. Talking to them really about, I think the good thing about both Contact and BAC are both organisations are really clear, and have been for some time, that the arts and theatre has benefits that are much further reaching than just making great art or great theatre performances. Actually, it's a fantastic tool for social change and for idea development, and actually creativity is something that businesses are really looking for. And I think the relationship with Dil Sidhu from the Manchester Business School, who was on the panel, is absolutely something that he said is that what's brilliant about the agency is these great young people with ideas, and that you can learn business skills and business acumen, and that can be taught. But ideas development and that sort of creative spark is something that's much harder to teach and much harder to find, and that this programme develops those skills in young people. I think we're still finessing how we talk about the agency to different people and how we get them on board, but the best way really is to show them and let them experience it directly for themselves, and to be able to now talk about what the outcomes have been for people that have been through the project over the last 2 years. They're vital, those roles, and we have chosen them really carefully, and they have to be people who have a real understanding of what it means to work in communities and really want to work in communities and be part of those communities. So they've got to be prepared to spend time there. Steve spent a lot of time in Moston and Harper Hay, hanging out, in community venues, getting to know everybody really personally, and personal relationships are definitely key to this. So you can send loads of emails, but actually the best way to have a conversation, whether it's with Lou at the Miners or, somebody else from another community organisation or another project or a school or whatever, is to just go in and have a chat. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to just send emails from behind their desk or maybe pick up the phone, but don't necessarily want to, travel a few miles up the road and hang around till you can get hold of the right person you need to speak to. But that has actually made a huge difference. And then again, thinking about artists who really do think about creativity in that way, about and its transformational nature and its use as a tool for other things other than just making art, and then really understanding that and wanting to take a risk, because every one of them, we've introduced them to the methodology, we've been through this, has been like, what on earth is this? And they've all will happily say that they've been really pushed, their practice has been pushed, and that's what they've really enjoyed about it, because it has forced them out of their comfort zone, and that's what they're doing to the young people through the methodology. And I think it's quite good that that's replicated in the way that the facilitators feel when they're going through the methodology and they're learning it. They feel like they're being pushed, tested all the time, and definitely the way Faustini taught us the methodology did that. I mean, that was a really hard few days when we learned that methodology as a team. We were all pretty much near the breaking point at points, and I think that was a really really useful, because I think that's definitely how some of the young people feel at different points in the process. So the agency has become a really significant project at Contact. It's one of our sort of key programmes that we talk about all the time whenever we're talking to anyone about the work we do. It has started to implicate and infiltrate into the way we talk about and think about all our work. So we talk about territory a lot now in all the projects, always talking about the young people's territory, our territory, communities, thinking about what the impact of different things are. At BAC, it's been an impetus for them to change their whole vision. So there used to be to invent the future of theatre. I don't know if you know that they've just recently changed that, and that's based on their involvement with the agency is about taking creative risk and all sorts of things. So they've now got sort of a cyclical thing. So it really does like get hold of you, and it has really impacted on how we think about work. But the future plans are we're planning to continue the programme in Manchester and London. We're hopefully going to hear shortly about funding for the next 3 years for those. Alongside that, we're developing a more thorough sort of evaluation framework, looking at theory of change, looking at how we really can evidence the impact of the work that we're doing with those young people. And we're starting to put together plans for a rollout nationally to other cities. So at the moment, the conversation that we're having, which we haven't made a final decision one way or the other, is around the merit of growing in Manchester and London, so Greater Manchester and Greater London. So do we start another project in Rochdale or Salford or Stockport, or do we take it to Bristol or Birmingham? And we haven't made a decision yet about that. Some of it feels like that having volume of young people in a smaller area might have a bigger impact, and it would allow them to connect more easily, but also there's definitely Manchester and London have very much enjoyed their connections as being from different places and different cities. So we're still exploring that, and part of what we want to do over the next sort of few months with the funding that we've got and with the other partners and with young people as well is to try and take a view on that. All of Contact's work really is around trying to make sure that people who wouldn't normally have access to theatre and arts and culture do have access, both in making it themselves but also in seeing other people's work or contributing to the development of that. I think to me personally, all organisations, particularly subsidised organisations, have should have a commitment and to going and make out and taking their work out and making those relationships and connecting with their local communities and really making a difference, but not in a understanding what the community wants and what the community needs, rather than taking what the organisation thinks that community needs. So like with the agency, supporting those young people to come up with projects and ideas they have, and with our Future Fires programme, which supports young artists to run socially engaged projects in their own communities. Very much that's about saying you understand what your community needs and wants far better than we do. You've got an idea about how to address that. What we can do is support you to make that project happen. We can teach you how to fundraise, how to budget, how to think about things like health and safety, safeguard and stuff like that. But you're better placed to address the needs of your community than we are to just wander in and say, hey, we've got a great idea for a project that we think you need. I think, we experienced all sorts of preconceptions. When we first started working in North Manchester, it wasn't even to do with about being from theatre. It was like, are you the police? Are you social workers? Are you a paedophile? Why do you want to talk to us? What are you wanting to, just even engaging in young people? So there were loads and what do you want from us? What are we going to get out of it? Which is why building those relationships is really important. You've really got to put the effort in to building a relationship with the community and the people in it if they're going to trust you. And particularly I think in communities that are seen as deprived or are deprived, there can be a lot of stuff that is coming in all the time that comes and goes, and so quite often people can feel a bit let down by that. So either big promises are made, or people come in and they run something for a short time and then it goes away again, and I think people get a bit tired of that and they think, oh, you've just come because you want to tick a box, or you've got a number to fill, and then you're going to go away again and maybe don't really care about us. So I think there's a bit of that. Whenever I say I work in a theatre, everyone's like, oh, what sort of shows do you put on? And people want things they've heard of. They don't want to know that we're making a show about FGM, and people then suddenly look a bit worried about that, and what they want you to say is, oh, well, we're putting on Hamlet, or something that they can get their head around. So I think contact in general, when you're talking about people and to people about it in the theatre, the expectations is you put on plays, things we've probably heard of, and that's what you do. And you might want us to be an audience for that, but we're not necessarily expecting you to want to know what we think about things or what our experiences are. So I think that's one of the challenges we come across quite a bit. I think we're not a usual theatre, and if people have had an experience of theatre, some of them haven't, but if they have, usually it's going to be something much more traditional, or something like somewhere like the Palace. They might have gone and seen a musical or whatever, or had a trip to something. So that's their concept of what a theatre does. I don't think young people think about contact as a theatre. We were talking earlier about people using contact theatre, which we are just called contact, but a lot of people use the word theatre, but actually none of the young people we work with use the word theatre. They call it the contact. And although they know we're a theatre, I don't think that's part of how they think about us. Even though they know we put on shows, I just don't think that they put us in that bracket, as the same bracket as other organisations. And I think if you talk to the young people in the agency, they know there's theatre spaces in here, they've been in them, some of them have seen shows that are on here, but I don't think that is what contact is to them. It'd be interesting to ask someone like Adam or Molly, what is contact? But that's not their experience of it, and I think for a lot of young people we work with, their experience is something different. It's about them and focused on them and their development, rather than focused on the work that we present here. We always hope that young people that we're working with start to become audiences for the work we present, which they do. 75% of our audiences are under 35, which is really unusual. 40% of them are from non-white communities, from BAME communities. But it's a gradual journey. We don't expect that to happen overnight. You take part in a workshop in Moston or Harpay, and then tomorrow you're buying a ticket for a show. But yes, we hope that becomes a loop, and that they start to see through their own experiences of being in projects and the value maybe of other creative experiences as participants or audience members. So it does start to join up, and we also hope that they then start to engage in other projects that happen in the building, because there's not just the projects that happen outside, there are the projects that happen in the building, and start building those relationships and connections. Lots of sort of entry-level projects which are sort of drop-in both music and performance and technical theatre, and then there's sort of projects that increase the amount of commitment that you need to give, that allow young people to come at the different stage that they feel ready to engage with. So they might just want to come as a one-off workshop, or whenever they feel like turning up for Monday Drop. But at some point they might decide they want to join the young company and be in that project for a whole year. So there's lots of stepping stones, but it's not a fixed journey through contact. You can enter at any point. You can drop out, come back. So you find your own journey through it. But we do find that they quite often cross over into other projects, or then work on other projects, become peer mentors of other young people, facilitators, artists. I mean, Kate and Reese, who work on the agency at the moment, both were young people at Contact. So they've sort of done full circle really, and now they're developing new people and talking to them about how and when will they become the facilitators of young people in the future. For that to be modelled to young people as a viable option, an opportunity for them, and say, actually, this person is not so dissimilar from me, their background is similar, they're not that much older than me, they're here being paid to do this job. Maybe I could do that, maybe, and it didn't take them 20 years. They were in the company 2 years ago or 3, it seems much more attainable than maybe some of the other experiences they have in school or whatever, where they meet someone but they're like, well, that person had to train for this long, and that's not something that I'm going to be able to do in the near future.
Brilliant.
it is something that we struggled with when we first learned the methodology, because you're right, we definitely come from organisations where everyone can succeed and we want them to succeed, and not that we don't want them to succeed in the agency, but that the option is there for everyone. So it's something we talked about a lot, like what does that mean to let a young person fail, basically, and not that we would talk to them about it being failure in that sense, but they would definitely feel like they haven't won, definitely. They might not feel they failed, but they haven't won the money, they haven't been awarded at that point in time. But we talked about it a lot, and we talked about it with Faustini quite a lot, who felt adamant that this was our problem and not a problem that young people were so worried about because of all the reality TV, for example, things like X Factor, America's Next Top Model. There were winners in all these things, and that young people buy into all the time. There's some sort of process, and there are things I think that quite often we're like sort of poo-poo a bit, and they're like, oh, it's awful, what a terrible thing, exploitative thing. It was like, but that's not how young people think about things. That's not how they feel about things. So we agreed anyway that we would trial it. As I said, we tried the whole process exactly as it was done in Rio. But actually it hasn't been a problem in the way that I worried it would be. It's difficult, it's the worst conversation that we have to have in the whole project, which is where somebody hasn't been successful. But they have all been able to cite the successes that they feel they've got out of being part of that first cycle, and they've all had ideas of where they're going to go next, and we don't just drop them. We do continue to talk to them, to reconnect them. We encourage them to come back, which Adam is a great example of somebody who was in the first project, didn't even get to the panel, didn't even turn up. He was so worried about presenting, and then came back a second time and did get through. But even when you look at Danny Timmy, didn't get through the panel, came back and didn't get through the panel a second time, which is a really difficult experience, is still really talks proudly about it, and has now got a place at university, and has decided that he's going to study coding, which is what his project was about, and is talking, is in touch with us saying, guess what I've done this and I've achieved this. And so it feels like it does work. And also because we have the other projects and programmes at Contact that are available, that are open access, there are lots of other things that we can plug them into here if they want to continue their relationship with us. It's more difficult, I think, with the agency, because young people don't see it as an arts project, or it's not an arts project, even though it's an arts methodology. So it's less easy to come and join the young company and be in a show, because that's not what they've been doing for the last 3 months or 4 months. They've been working on their business idea. But I think the focus on building the networks of the young people, and getting them to think about networks, and mapping those networks and understanding how to make connections, I think is really useful in getting over that hurdle of not being successful, because there's lots of people they've met up until that point that they can continue their relationships with, and think about it. And I guess that's the reality of businesses and enterprises and things, is that not many of them do succeed. Only a few do, and it's about that risk taking, and that resilience are actually really important skills in getting an idea that works. And we do talk about that in the process, talk about successful people who have tried loads of other things before they hit that, the jackpot with one successful idea. And there's lots of successful business people and entrepreneurs out there that you can give as examples of like being bankrupt and things many times before they became successful. So they can see that it isn't just them, it's actually quite a normal part of idea development. And that does link back to theatre and creativity as well, because when you're devising work and trying out ideas, people have loads of really shit ideas that never get made, never get past the first sharing or the R&D, because they're just awful. That doesn't make them a bad artist or a bad theatre maker. It just means that idea wasn't very good. And I think we all have to accept every idea we have can't be great, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean we're failures. And so I think it's about making sure that language is built in all the way through the process, and that idea of taking a risk and not being frightened to fail, and then getting back up and taking another risk, is very much part of the vocabulary of the way we talk about the agency from the get-go. so that young people are sort of really taking that on board. Because I think otherwise there would be a risk of a young person who maybe already perceives themselves to be a failure for whatever reason, maybe hasn't had a good experience at school, has been told they're not going to amount to much, just feeling that they're having that reinforced. So it's really important that we're sort of turning that on the head. But facilitator like someone like Reese, who very much will say he had that experience himself and at school was told he would not amount to anything, remembers that teacher and that conversation, is evidence to those young people that those people are wrong. They can see Reese, they can see how brilliant he is, how fantastic he is, how successful he is. So they can see that, these people that have said that to them know as little as the person that said that to Reese 10 years ago, and that, that doesn't have to be the thing that stops them achieving what they want to. Contact is not just being impacted on by the Cuts the Arts, it's also been really heavily impacted on by the Cuts the other services that young people access. So whereas previously, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, in a group of young people we might have 1 or 2 young people that might have some mental health issues. Now we're talking about 60 or 70% of a group of young people, but the support that they were previously accessing just isn't there. It's harder for them to find housing, we're making referrals to services for them quite often, but the waiting lists are really, really long. Young people who were being quite well supported had support workers and things like that. Their hours have been really cut back of their support workers. And then because their relationship is here, they come here to us for support, which is great that we feel that they have a place that they can come, but we're not specialists in that area of work. And also that becomes quite intense when you're talking about, we work with 16,000 young people in a year, and if you're talking about lots of young people who need lots of your time, which we want to give to them, but it becomes quite an intense thing for the project managers to try and provide that pastoral support, help find them referral services, and that does impact on their ability to engage in projects like this. If you become homeless and you can't find anywhere to live, your priority isn't going to be coming to your project or being in a show. It's going to have to be about finding somewhere to live, and it is really difficult for young people at the moment. It's really difficult out there. Previously, just having free activities was enough. Now, just getting the bus here is too much for a lot of young people, which means we're spending more money in a time of having less money in helping young people buy bus tickets and things to allow them to continue to access projects. We feed a lot of young people on projects, as we do at the agency. We also feed the young company when they're in their rehearsals, because a lot of young people that come in to participate haven't necessarily had very much to eat. Means that they're not able to be as productive as we would like them to be. We're usually quite physical, particularly in the sort of theatre projects that we do. We feed them, and then we know that they've had something substantial to eat, so that then when they're working with us during that evening project, there's less chance that they're going to keel over or feel unwell. Or
how do you fund that?
At the moment, it's funded through our core funding and through the trusts and foundations that we get, but it's a difficult one, because it's always something that's questioned when you put into project budgets if you're going to trusts and foundations. But we find it's really important. We've just been talking about another project that we did in the autumn, which is based around the UN Convention of Rights for the Child, and the right to art and culture is in there, which is a convention we signed up to, but it isn't something that is spoken about, and it feels like it's one of the rights amongst many that young people and children and others are having taken away from them because it's been taken out of school. The more cuts that happen, there'll be less free access for young people, there'll be less projects happening in communities. In this statute it says that that's a right, that they're entitled to access to that, but somehow it's never mentioned, it's totally forgotten. So I joined Contact 8.5 years ago, it's a very long time ago. I had been involved myself as a child in youth theatre and drama, something my mum got me involved with. I was quite a vocal, noisy, slightly disruptive child, I think. And she thought that she would try and channel that. And so that had been a big part of my life as a young person, and I thought I wanted to be an actor. But I always sort of taught drama, so I worked with the younger, as I sort of got into my late teens, taught the younger members of my youth theatre, worked on their shows, directed their shows, and really enjoyed watching their development, seeing other people develop. So I went off and did a drama degree, still thinking I wanted to be an actor, but continued to sort of teach alongside it, but also do work with various communities around drama and stuff. And as I went through my degree, realised that actually I was much more interested in other people's development through theatre and theatre practices than actually performing myself. So when I graduated, I was fortunate enough to get a job working for a community arts organisation in the Black Country, which was cross art form and that didn't have a building. And so all the work that we did happened in community settings and site-specific work, which was a brilliant grounding of working with different communities in lots of different ways and addressing lots of issues through using arts and culture. And after I'd been there for about 3 years or so, the job opportunity came up here to be Head of Creative Development. Contact takes risks on young people, and I think I was absolutely evident of that. I was still in there, very much in their age bracket of 13 to 30. I was still the age that I could be in the Young Actors Company, which did prove difficult at some times because a lot of the young people were the same age as me, but they absolutely did take a chance on me and made me Head of Creative Development, and I've been here ever since. And the role has now grown to be managing the whole of the artistic team. So I started off just managing the participatory programme and the project managers that worked on that, and now we have one artistic team, which is programming, producing and participation.